The gun was already drawn when Della Keller walked through the door of the Lockhart ranch house, and the man holding it did not lower it even when he saw her face. Raymond Lockhart stood behind his oak desk with the Colt Navy revolver aimed at the space between the two men he had apparently been interrogating, and his eyes cold as a December sky over the Texas panhandle swept from the strangers to the woman who had just let herself in from the front porch without knocking. The room smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something sharp that she could not name, but would later understand was fury held on a very short leash. "I do not recall inviting company," Raymond said, and his voice was so flat and even that it frightened her more than shouting would have. Della did not move. She had her travel bag in one hand and a letter in the other, a letter bearing his name written in her own careful handwriting, and she held it up the way a woman might hold a candle in a dark cave hoping it would be enough light to stop something terrible from happening. "I rode ahead," she said. "My name is Della Keller. I believe your foreman, Mr. Holt, arranged." "I know who you are," Raymond said. He still had not lowered the gun. He was looking at the two men again, and one of them, a wiry fellow with a bleeding cut above his left eye, began to ease sideways toward the window. Raymond's gaze did not waver, but his voice cut across the room like a whip crack. "Move another inch, Denny, and the next letter anyone writes about you will be very short." The man called Denny went absolutely still. Della pressed her back against the doorframe and tried to breathe normally. She had been warned. Standing on the train platform in Amarillo 3 days ago, her trunk stacked beside her and her future sitting somewhere ahead of her in the direction of Hale County, the foreman Tom Holt had been explicit. He had driven out to meet her, hired by Raymond's attorney to handle the practical arrangements, and before he put her bags in the wagon bed he had stopped and looked at her with the kind of direct, uncomfortable honesty she had only ever seen in very old men and very young children. "Miss Keller," Tom Holt had said, pulling his hat brim down against the wind, "I need to tell you something before we ride out, because it wouldn't be fair not to. The boss never warmed to anyone. Not since his wife passed, not since his brother left, not in 7 years on that land. He agreed to this arrangement because the ranch needs a woman who can manage the household accounts and the correspondence, and his attorney convinced him it was sensible. But don't go out there expecting warmth. You won't find it. He's a good man, but he's sealed himself up like a jar of winter preserves, and he doesn't leave room for anyone to get in." Della had thanked him for the warning. She had climbed into the wagon. She had watched the Texas flatlands unfold around her for 2.5 days, and she had told herself she had not come this far to be discouraged by a hired hand's honest assessment of a man's character. She had come because she had nothing left in Memphis. She had come because her father's debts had swallowed the house and the furniture and most of her dignity, and because a legal arrangement housekeeper, bookkeeper, eventual wife, if things progressed naturally, had seemed like solid ground when every other kind of ground had fallen out from under her. She had not come expecting to walk into the middle of something that looked very much like a confession being extracted at gunpoint. Raymond finally put the revolver down on the desk. Not a way down, within easy reach, a statement rather than a concession. He came around the desk and walked to where Denny and the other man were standing, and he spoke to them very quietly for about 20 seconds. Della could not hear the words, but she could see the two men's faces change, and then they were moving quickly toward a side door and gone before the minute was out. Raymond turned to look at her. He was tall. She had expected that from Tom Holt's description, and broad through the shoulders in the way that men who do real physical work are broad, not as decoration but as consequence. His hair was dark and shot through at the temples with iron gray that seemed too distinguished for a man who could not be much past 35. His jaw was the kind of jaw that looked as if it had never been soft, and his eyes were. She struggled to find the right word and landed on guarded. Deeply architecturally guarded. "Welcome to the Crooked L," he said, with absolutely no warmth whatsoever. Della straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. She had been raised to do that. Her mother had told her that women who looked away first in difficult moments spent their whole lives looking away, and she had decided at age 12 that she would not be one of them. "Thank you," she said. "I apologize for the poor timing of my arrival." "The timing was fine," he said. "The situation you interrupted was handled." He looked at her bag and then at the door behind her. "Is there more luggage? A trunk? On the porch? I'll have someone bring it in." He was already moving past her, already looking at something other than her face, already closing a door she had not even fully opened yet. "Mrs. Aldridge will show you your room. Supper is at 6. I'll go over the household accounts with you tomorrow morning." And that was her welcome. That was all of it. She stood in the doorway and watched Raymond Lockhart walk out the front door of his own house with the ease of a man who had long since decided that the inside of it held nothing important. And she thought about Tom Holt's warning, and she thought about the 7 years the foreman had mentioned, and she thought that whatever had sealed Raymond Lockhart up so completely must have been something extraordinary in its cruelty. She thought that, and then she put it away, because she had not come here to fix him. She had come here because she needed solid ground. The Crooked L Ranch covered 4,000 acres in the rolling grassland south of Chilea, Texas, in the year 1878. It ran cattle longhorns mostly, with some crossbred Herefords that Raymond had brought up from south of San Antonio 2 years prior, and it had a bunkhouse that held 12 hands, a cookhouse, 2 barns, a smithy, and the main house, which was larger than it had any right to be for one man living alone. It had clearly been built for more than one man. It had clearly been built with a future in mind that had not arrived. Della understood this about the house by the end of her first evening in it. Mrs. Aldridge, a broad, capable woman of about 55 who had cooked and cleaned for Raymond since his wife died, showed her through the rooms with a pragmatic efficiency that Della appreciated. And in the showing she could see the intention built into the architecture. The dining room was large enough for 8. The kitchen had 2 ovens. There was a sitting room off the main hall with a piano that had not been played in years, judging by the film of dust on the keys, and a formal parlor that Raymond apparently never used, and a study where he did his actual living, and his bedroom at the end of a long hall upstairs that was the most sparsely furnished room in the entire house. Her room was across the hall from his, which was not the arrangement she had expected, and which she decided not to think too carefully about. She slept poorly that first night. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the ranch, the horses shifting in the barn, the distant yipping of coyotes, the particular silence of open country that was never quite silent at all. And she thought about the letter Raymond's attorney had sent to her father's lawyer in Memphis, the letter that had started all of this. It had been professional and precise. It had outlined duties and wages and the possibility, neither promised nor excluded, of a more permanent arrangement if both parties found the situation agreeable. It had been written in a lawyer's careful hand, but she had read it so many times that she could hear a voice underneath the legal language, a voice asking for something that the writer was unwilling to name directly. She had said yes because she was practical. She remained awake wondering if she had also said yes because of that unnamed thing. The next morning she was up before 6 and had found the ledgers before Raymond came down. The household accounts were, as Tom Holt had warned her, in a state that suggested Raymond Lockhart was a man of considerable intelligence applied entirely in the wrong direction when it came to bookkeeping. He knew cattle. He knew land. He knew weather patterns and grass growth, and when to move stock and when to hold them. He did not know, or did not care, that he had been overcharged by the feed merchant in Chilea for 11 consecutive months, or that the household had been paying for a cleaning service in town that no one at the ranch had ever seen. She had both errors documented and corrected on paper before he walked into the study with his coffee. He stopped when he saw her. Just for a moment of fractional hesitation, the kind that a less observant woman would have missed before he came to the desk and looked at what she had laid out. "The feed merchant is a man named Calloway," she said. "Has he been providing your hay on contract or on order, Raymond picked up the ledger and read it. Contract. Rolling 3-month agreements. Then this, she pointed to a column of figures, is approximately $4.30 per delivery that you have been overpaying. Over 11 months that amounts to $47 and some change, he said before she could complete the calculation. She looked up. He was fast with numbers. She noted that. Yes. And this here, she moved her finger to the second page, is a service that appears on your accounts as town maintenance recurring. But when I checked the dates against Mrs. Aldridge's household diary, no one from any service has been to this property. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Who signed off on those payments?" "Your previous bookkeeper, a Mr. Renfrew. Renfrew left 6 months ago." Raymond's voice had gone to that flat, careful place again. The place that she was beginning to understand was not coldness exactly, but concentration. It was the voice he used when he was thinking very fast and did not want the thinking to show. "You found this in one morning. The errors are fairly clear once you know what to look for." He set the ledger down and looked at her. It was the first time since she had arrived that he had looked at her directly for more than 2 consecutive seconds, and she felt it the way you feel the sun come out from behind clouds, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with an unmistakable physical reality. "I'll ride into Chelea today," he said. "I'd like the documentation you've prepared." "Of course." She handed him the papers she had written up. Their fingers did not touch in the exchange, but the air between them was briefly charged with something that made her want to look away. She did not look away. Raymond folded the papers and put them in his jacket pocket. He turned to go and then stopped, his hand on the doorframe, the same doorframe she had pressed herself against the night before, and he said, without turning around, "You can ride." "Yes." "Good." And then he was gone. Tom Holt found her on the back porch an hour later, where she was reviewing the next set of ledgers with a cup of coffee balanced on the railing beside her. He was a lean, sun-weathered man in his late 40s with a kind face that he kept very neutral when he was not certain of the terrain, and he studied her for a moment before speaking. "He come down this morning." "He did." "And," she looked up from the ledger, "he has gone to Chelea to address some billing irregularities." Tom Holt blinked. Already, the evidence was fairly clear. Tom Holt was quiet for a moment. She could see him reassembling some expectation he had brought to the conversation. "He usually takes his coffee in his study alone for an hour before he speaks to anyone," he said. "I was in his study," she said. "He adapted." Another pause. Tom Holt pressed his lips together, and she realized he was suppressing a smile. "Miss Keller," he said, "how are you finding things?" "Manageable," she said. Then, because he had been honest with her on the platform and she thought he deserved the same courtesy, "He is difficult." "But I suspected he would be. You told me as much." "I did." Tom Holt turned his hat in his hands. "What I didn't tell you, and I probably should, is why he's the way he is. Because the version I gave you on the platform was the short version, and the short version makes him sound simply cold. He isn't cold, not exactly." She set the ledger down. "Tell me the long version." Tom Holt leaned against the porch post and looked out over the south pasture, where a line of longhorns moved slowly through the dry grass. "He built this ranch for his wife, Evangeline. They met in Dallas in '71, married inside of 6 months. She was 22 and he was 28, and they were both completely sure of each other, the way young people are who have never been wrong about anything important. He bought this land and built that house, and they were going to have a big family, fill every room." Della looked at the house. She thought about the piano. She thought about the parlor no one used. "She died in childbirth in '73, Tom Holt said. "Baby didn't survive either." And then 2 years after that, his brother James, who had been his foreman and his closest friend James, took a disagreement about the ranch's financial direction and turned it into something permanent. Left on bad terms. Left debts that Raymond spent a year covering. Left letters that Raymond never answered and eventually stopped receiving. He paused. So in the space of 4 years the man lost his wife, his child, and his brother. And what he did with that is he worked. He built the ranch into what it is now. He built himself into something that can withstand anything because he decided that the only things worth trusting are land and cattle because they do not leave, and they do not die on you unexpectedly if you take care of them properly. The wind came across the pasture and moved the dry grass in long silver waves. He is not a man who does not feel things, Tom Holt said quietly. He is a man who has decided that feeling things is not something he can afford. Della sat with that for a long moment. She picked up her ledger. "Thank you, Mr. Holt," she said, "for telling me. I figured you had a right to know what you've walked into. I appreciate that." She paused. "I should tell you that I am not here to rescue him. I am here because I needed a position, and this one was offered." Tom Holt looked at her sideways with an expression that said he believed about half of that. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and walked off the porch. The weeks that followed were a study in careful distances and small revelations. Raymond returned from Chilea having recovered $32 of the $47 from Callaway, and with documentation that would allow his attorney to pursue the rest. He told her this at supper that evening in the same flat, businesslike tone he used for everything, and she received it the same way, and they ate their meal largely in silence, and she thought it was the most honest meal she had ever eaten. She found a rhythm in the house. She managed the household accounts with a precision that startled Mrs. Aldridge, who had been expecting someone decorative and found instead someone efficient. She corresponded with suppliers and drafted letters for Raymond to review and sign, and she organized a filing system for the ranch's legal documents that he had apparently been shoving into a trunk for 7 years without any particular order. She rode out with Tom Holt twice a week to understand the operation of the ranch, because she could not manage accounts she did not understand, and she learned the south pasture with its unreliable water, and the north range where the grass was sweetest, and the creek that ran along the eastern boundary that Tom Holt called reliable only in the way that all creek water in Texas was reliable, meaning not vary. Raymond watched her learn it. She did not think he knew she noticed him watching, but she did. She would look up from a conversation with Tom Holt or pause in her reading of a survey map and find Raymond at the fence or in the barn doorway or at the window of his study, and his expression in those unguarded moments was not quite the stone face he showed her directly. It was something more complicated. It was the look of a man who had been told something was impossible and was watching evidence accumulate to the contrary. She did not know quite what to do with that, so she let it accumulate too. In the 4th week, the trouble that had begun with Denny and the other man in the study became clearer. Raymond came to find her one afternoon when she was working on the correspondence at the dining room table, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before coming in, which she had noticed was his habit. He always paused in doorways, as though confirming the room was safe before entering, and she wondered if he knew he did it. "The men I was questioning when you arrived," he said. "Denny Marsh and a man called Crate. They were employed here for 4 months before I found evidence that they were reporting our stock movements to a man in Amarillo who has been running cattle off the western range of 3 different operations in this county." She put down her pen. "A cattle thief. His name is Garvey Cole. He moves stock in small numbers over several months, so it looks like natural attrition. By the time anyone counts carefully enough to notice the pattern, the cattle are in New Mexico or Kansas under different brands. And Marsh and Crate were his informants." "Yes." Raymond came to the table and sat down across from her, which was unusual. He generally remained standing in rooms with her, as though sitting indicated a commitment to the conversation he was not prepared to make. The fact that he sat now meant something. "Cole knows I've removed his people. He'll know I'm aware of the scheme. That means either he backs off completely or he becomes a more direct problem." Della looked at him. "Which do you think it will be?" "I think a man who has been running this kind of operation for this long does not back off when he's threatened," Raymond said. "I think he escalates." "What can you do?" "I've written to the sheriff in Chilea and the county marshal. I have documentation. But the documentation took time to gather and more time to be acted on, and in the meantime the ranch is vulnerable." He paused. I am telling you this because you should know the situation you are in and be able to make an informed decision about whether you wish to remain. She understood what he was actually offering. He was giving her an exit. He was holding the door open and telling her it was fine to walk through it, and he was doing it in a way that protected her from having to ask for it. It was the most considerate thing he had said to her since her arrival, and the fact that it was wrapped in the language of information exchange rather than actual concern did not change what it was underneath. I am not leaving, she said. Raymond looked at her. Miss Keller, I am capable of assessing risk, Mr. Lockhart. I have done so. I am staying. A silence stretched between them, and in it she could see him deciding something. He nodded once, the way he nodded when a business matter was settled, and she thought, she was not certain but she thought, that she saw something behind his eyes that was not quite business. Then I'll arrange for someone to keep watch on the house at night, he said. Thank you, she said, and picked up her pen. He was at the doorway before she spoke again. Mr. Lockhart, he stopped. 7 years is a long time to carry something alone. I am not suggesting that you are wrong to have done so. But you should know that the people around you, Mr. Holt, Mrs. Aldridge, they are not waiting for you to give them a reason to stay. They already have one. You might consider allowing yourself the same. She did not look up from her correspondence as she said it. She heard him in the doorway for a long moment, long enough that she began to wonder if she had overstepped, and then she heard him say, very quietly, Good evening, Miss Keller. Good evening, she said. The sound of his boots on the floorboards moved away down the hall. She set her pen down and pressed her fingers briefly against her mouth and thought about the fact that her heart was beating with a speed that was entirely disproportionate to the conversation she had just had. She picked the pen back up. She was here to be practical. She was here because she needed solid ground. But solid ground, she thought, could have unexpected warmth in it, like rock that had been in the sun all day. October came to the Texas Panhandle with a cold front from the north that turned the air sharp and sent the cattle moving restlessly toward the southern pastures. Della had been at the Crooked L for 6 weeks, and the ranch had settled around her in the way that places do when you begin to understand them. Not comfortable exactly, not easy, but known. She knew which floorboards creaked and which door stuck in damp weather. She knew that Mrs. Aldridge made biscuits on Tuesday and Friday, and that Tom Holt took his coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. She knew that Raymond rose at 5 in the morning and was in the barn by 5:15, and did not come in for breakfast until 7, and that in the hour between she could hear him moving through the house when he came in early on cold mornings, quietly, as though he thought the household was still asleep and was taking care not to wake it. She had started leaving coffee on the stove for him on those mornings. She did not make a production of it. She was up early herself. She had always been an early riser, and she simply made coffee and left it and went back to whatever she was doing. For the first week she was not sure he noticed. Then one morning he came into the kitchen when she was there instead of already back at her desk, and he stopped and looked at the pot on the stove and then at her. You've been doing this, he said. The coffee, yes. You don't have to. I know that. She poured herself a cup and went to the window to look at the dark pasture. There is no rule that says I have to. I do it because it is cold in the mornings and coffee helps, and making enough for one is exactly the same effort as making enough for two. He poured his cup and stood beside her at the window, and they were quiet together in the dark kitchen for 3 minutes while the ranch woke up outside, and it was the most companionable 3 minutes she had experienced since arriving, and she thought it was entirely possible that he felt it too. The threat from Garvey Cole materialized 10 days into October in a form that was more personal than Raymond had anticipated. Della had ridden into Chalea with Tom Holt to pick up a supply order and to deliver a packet of correspondence to the postal office, and when she came out of the general store with Tom Holt's list checked off, a man was leaning against the hitching post by their wagon. He was a heavy, smooth-faced man in his 40s with expensive boots and cheap eyes, and he looked at Della with a directness that was designed to be uncomfortable. "You'd be the woman from the Crooked L," he said, not a question. Tom Holt was beside her immediately. "She would be, and she's not interested in your conversation, Mr. Cole." The name landed on Della like a cold hand. She kept her face neutral. Garvey Cole smiled. "I just wanted to introduce myself, since I'll be a neighbor of sorts for the foreseeable future." He was looking at Della. "Word is Raymond Lockhart finally let someone into that house of his. Must be quite a woman to manage that." "The lady and I have errands to finish," Tom Holt said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man who is keeping himself under very strict control. "Absolutely." Cole tipped his hat to Della. "Tell your boss I hope there are no hard feelings about recent events. I run a business, he runs a business. These things can always be resolved with good faith on both sides." Della looked at him directly. She had decided on the approach in about 2 seconds. "I will pass along the greeting," she said pleasantly. "Though I should mention that I am also the one managing Mr. Lockhart's correspondence and legal documentation. So if you have anything you'd like to communicate in writing, you'll be communicating it through me." Cole's smile did not change in its shape, but something behind it shifted. "Is that right?" "It is." She climbed into the wagon with Tom Holt's assistance. "Good day, Mr. Cole." Tom Holt got the wagon moving at a pace that was faster than casual, and they were a quarter-mile out of Chalea before he let out a long breath. "That was very well handled," he said. "He wanted to rattle me," she said. "To take back to Raymond some report of me being rattled." "Yes, ma'am, that's exactly what it was. So I declined to be rattled." She paused. "He is watching the ranch. Has been since Raymond removed his men." Tom Holt's jaw was tight. "Raymond needs to know about this today." Raymond's reaction to the report was the most expressive she had seen from him. He was not loud about it. He was never loud. But the line of him went very still and his eyes went very dark, and he asked her twice to repeat exactly what Cole had said, and she did, and then he sat down, which she had come to understand meant the matter was serious enough to require full attention. "He approached you directly," Raymond said. "Yes, to send a message to me. That was my interpretation." Raymond turned his hat in his hands, a gesture she had not seen from him before, a gesture she recognized from Tom Holt, and she wondered if he had picked it up from the foreman over years of proximity, or if it was simply something men did on the Texas plains when they were thinking and needed something to do with their hands. "I don't like that he approached you." "I don't particularly like it either," she said, "but I handled it." "I know you did." He looked up at her. "Tom told me." "You told him you manage my correspondence and documentation." "It was accurate. It was more than accurate." The ghost of something, she would not call it a smile yet, she was not ready to call it that, crossed his face. "It told him you know where the legal documentation is kept. It told him you're not here in a purely domestic capacity. It told him you're a witness and a record keeper and someone who could be relevant in a legal proceeding. All of which are true. Which is exactly why it was effective." He set the hat down. "Miss Keller, I need to tell you something that I should have told you sooner, and I am telling you now because today's events make it relevant." He looked at her with an attention that made the air in the room feel different. "I did not agree to this arrangement solely because the ranch needed a bookkeeper. My attorney made that case and it was a valid one, but it was not the whole reason." She waited. "I was told about your situation, not in detail, just enough to understand that you had very few good options and that this arrangement, whatever it led to or didn't lead to, would at least be a stable one. I agreed because the arrangement made practical sense, yes. But I also agreed because I thought." He stopped. He looked at his hands. The stillness he usually maintained had a different quality to it now, more like effort than ease. "I thought that it was right to offer something real to someone who needed something real, and I have not said that plainly, and I should have." Della sat across from him in the study where she had first seen him with the gun, where she had first thought that this was going to be the hardest thing she had ever done, and she thought that she had been right about that, and also that she had been entirely unprepared for what hard would look like. "You are a better man than you advertise yourself to be," she said. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the general neighborhood of one. Tom Holt would tell you I'm difficult. Mr. Holt told me you were sealed up like a jar of winter preserves and that no one had managed to get in for 7 years. Raymond went very still. He said that. On the train platform, he was trying to prepare me. He was trying to talk you out of coming. No, she said. He was trying to make sure I came with accurate information. There's a difference. She looked at him. He is very loyal to you. They all are. Mrs. Aldridge and Mr. Holt and the hands who have been here more than a season. They do not stay because the wages are exceptional. They stay because of you, even sealed up the way you are. The silence that followed was the longest one they had shared, and it was a different kind of silence than the ones before. It was not two strangers being careful with each other. It was something more exposed than that. Raymond said, very quietly, "My wife's name was Evangeline. She would have liked you." Della felt the weight of that land on her, the weight of a name he had probably not said aloud to anyone in years, and she received it carefully. "I think I would have liked her," she said. He nodded once. He looked at the window. Outside, the wind was moving the dry grass in that slow silver way it had across the Texas flats, and the sky was very wide and very blue. "I'll write to the marshal again tomorrow about coal," he said. "I'll draft it tonight," she said, "so it's ready." He looked back at her with that complicated expression she was becoming familiar with. The one that she was beginning to understand was Raymond Lockhart in the process of letting something in that he had decided a long time ago not to let in. "Thank you," he said. "Of course," she said. Neither of them moved for another moment. And then they both did, in different directions, and the ordinary machinery of the ranch evening began again around them. But something had shifted, and they both knew it, and the knowing was very quiet and very large. The letter that came in early November changed the shape of everything in a way that no one at the Crooked L had anticipated. It arrived in a batch of correspondence that Della sorted on a Tuesday morning, and it was addressed to Raymond in a handwriting that made her pause, not because she recognized it, but because there was something unsteady about it, something that spoke of great effort. She brought the full batch to Raymond in his study and went to leave, and he looked at the letter in question and went very still. "Wait," he said. She stopped. He opened the letter. She watched his face read it, and his face was doing something she had not seen from it before, something that moved through several different stages of emotion in about 30 seconds, landing finally on something that was too many things at once to name. "It is from my brother," he said. He did not look up from the page. "James." She said nothing. "He is in Abilene. He is—" Raymond stopped. He turned the page. "He is ill. He says he is ill and that he has been ill for some time and that he is writing because—" Another stop. His jaw worked. "Because he does not expect to have many more opportunities to." The room was very quiet. "He says he is sorry," Raymond said. "He says that the financial matters were wrong and that he has known they were wrong since he left and that he has spent years with that knowledge." He put the letter down on the desk, face up, and pressed one hand flat over it as though it might try to escape. "He wants to see me." Della crossed the room to the desk. She looked at Raymond, not at the letter. His face was the face of a man who has been living inside a story. He told himself about betrayal and abandonment and has just been handed a different version of the same events, and does not know which version requires him to rebuild his whole interior architecture. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I don't know." "What do you feel?" He looked up at her, and the guarded quality was entirely gone from his expression, stripped away by the letter and by his own exhaustion with maintaining it, and what was underneath was a rawness that made her chest ache. "I feel angry," he said. "I feel angry that he waited this long, and I feel—" He stopped again. "You feel relieved that he wrote at all," she said quietly. His throat moved. "Yes." "Those are not contradictory things," she said. "You are allowed to feel both." Raymond stood up from the desk and turned to the window, and she let him have the window for a minute. Outside, Tom Holt was crossing the yard with two of the younger hands, and the morning light was long and golden across the brown grass, and a hawk was quartering the south pasture on some private business of its own. "Go to him," Della said. Whatever was between you, whatever the debt was, whatever the argument was, none of that will matter as much as this letter in another year. Go to him." He did not turn around. "The ranch. Tom Holt has been managing this ranch for longer than I have been here. Mrs. Aldridge has the household. I have the accounts. Nothing here requires you for 3 days. Garvey Cole, the marshal's office is aware of Cole. The documentation is filed. If anything happens, I will write to you immediately." She paused. Raymond. It was the first time she had used his given name, and she heard it land in the room. He heard it too. His shoulders changed almost imperceptibly. "Go to your brother." He turned from the window. He looked at her with an expression that she thought he was probably unaware of, the expression of a man seeing something clearly for the first time in a very long while. "Will you be here when I get back?" he asked. It was a simple question. It was not a simple question at all. "Yes," she said, "I will be here." He left the next morning at first light. She watched the wagon carry him north from the kitchen window, her coffee in both hands, and Mrs. Aldridge appeared beside her and watched too without saying anything. And after the wagon was out of sight, the housekeeper said, "He hasn't left this ranch for anything personal in 4 years. Della turned. "What do you mean?" "He goes to Chilea for business. He goes to Amarillo when he has to, but he has not gone anywhere for a personal reason in 4 years. Mrs. Aldridge looked at her with the steady assessment of a woman who has seen a great deal and filtered it through hard experience. "You told him to go. It was the right thing." "Yes." Mrs. Aldridge went back to the stove. "It was." Raymond was gone for 4 days. In those 4 days, 3 things happened. The first was that Garvey Cole made a move. 2 of his men were caught on the eastern edge of the Crooked L's range at night, cutting fence wire. Tom Holt's night rider found them before they had done much damage, and they were sent off at rifle point with a very clear message about what would happen next time. Tom Holt wrote up the incident in detail, and Della added it to the file of documentation for the marshal. The second was that Della found, in the back of the records trunk she had been organizing, a deed to 40 acres of land northeast of the ranch's main boundary, held in Raymond's name, that no one had mentioned, and that did not appear in any current accounting. It was land purchased in 1874, 1 year after Evangeline's death, and the purchase had never been connected to the ranch's operations in any document she could find. She set it aside to ask him about when he returned. The third was that she admitted to herself, in the privacy of her own room on the 3rd night of his absence, that the house felt wrong without him in it. Not wrong in the way that it had felt wrong before she understood it, when she was still a stranger moving through someone else's architecture. Wrong in the way a room feels when you have become accustomed to a person being in it and they are not. She sat with that admission for a long time. She turned it over the way you turn over a stone you found in a field, looking for what it means. She had come here for solid ground. She had found something she had not expected, which was warmth in the rock itself. Raymond came back on the evening of the 4th day, arriving after supper when the house was settling into its nighttime quiet. She heard the wagon and came to the front porch, and she stood there in the lamplight and watched him drive in, and when he climbed down from the wagon he looked different. Not younger, he would never look young, but lighter, as though something of considerable weight had been removed from the load he was carrying. He saw her on the porch and he came straight to her, not to the barn, which was where he normally went first when arriving from a drive. "He's still alive," Raymond said. "He is very ill, consumption. But he's still alive, and the doctor in Abilene says he may have more time than the letter suggested." "I'm glad," she said, and meant it completely. "We talked for 3 days. He came up the porch steps and stood close enough that she could see the residue of something on his face, exhaustion and grief, and something that looked surprisingly like peace. "We said things that should have been said years ago, and things I didn't know needed saying, and things that he stopped. It was enough. It was sufficient for both of us." "Good," she said softly. He looked at her. In the lamplight, with his guard down after 4 days of emotional labor, his face was the most fully present she had ever seen it, and she thought that this was what he must have looked like before Evangeline died, before James left, before 7 years of careful sealing up. She thought she was looking at the man he actually was underneath the man he had trained himself to be. The house was quieter than usual, he said. While I was gone, Abilene is a busy place. I meant here he was still looking at her. I thought about it while I was there, that it would be quieter. She did not look away. It was, she said. The space between them was about 18 inches. It had been 18 inches or more since she had arrived, carefully maintained by unspoken agreement, and it was approximately 18 inches now, except that it felt different. It felt like a distance that had been decided rather than a distance that simply was. Della, he said. Her name in his mouth was, she had not been prepared for that. She had thought she had. She had prepared for a great many things, but the particular way Raymond Lockhart said her name, with the careful attention he gave to everything that actually mattered to him, was not something she could have prepared for. Yes, she said. I have not been an easy man to be around. No, she agreed. Something shifted in his expression, the acknowledgement landing and being received and not rejected. I am not certain I know how to be a different kind, he said. I am not asking you to be a different kind, she said. I am asking you to let the kind you already are be a little more visible. He reached out and touched her face, just once, the backs of his fingers against her cheek, and then his hand dropped and he looked as though he was surprised at himself and she thought she might stop breathing. I should put the horse up, he said. You should, she agreed. He went down the porch steps and across the yard, and she stood in the lamplight and pressed her own hand briefly to her cheek where his had been, and she thought, there it is then. There is the thing I wasn't going to let myself think about. She thought it, and she did not put it away this time. 2 weeks after Raymond returned from Abilene, Garvey Cole made his real move. It came on a Wednesday afternoon when the ranch was at its most spread out. Tom Holt and 4 of the hands were on the South Range. 2 others were at the far water station, and Raymond was riding the eastern fence line with a young hand named Perch, who had been with the Crooked L for 3 months, and was still learning the lay of the land. Mrs. Aldridge had gone to Chilea with the buckboard for supplies. The only people at the main house were Della and a 14-year-old boy named Eli who helped with the horses. 3 men rode in from the North Road. Della saw them from the window of the study where she was working, and she knew immediately, with a certainty that came from she did not know where, that they had not come for a social call. She went to the window and looked at them and saw that they were the kind of men who rode in like they owned a place before they arrived at it. She went to the gun cabinet in the hallway. Raymond had shown her where it was in the 2nd week of her arrival, and had spent an afternoon teaching her to handle the Winchester rifle that was kept loaded there, with a calm patience that she had found surprising and later understood, was simply how he was when he was teaching something he cared about properly. She took the rifle now and went back to the study and stood to the side of the window where she could see the yard without being seen from outside. The 3 men dismounted. The one in front, she recognized Garvey Cole from the Chilea encounter, walked toward the house without knocking, and she heard the front door open below. Eli's voice, high and alarmed. Hey, you can't go to the barn, boy, Cole's voice said, flat and final. Della heard Eli's footsteps go fast across the yard. Good boy, she thought. Cole's boots on the stairs. She moved to the study door and stood in the doorway with the Winchester level and her hands steady. She had no particular plan beyond making it very clear that the study was occupied and defended. Cole appeared at the top of the stairs and looked at her for 2 long seconds. The Winchester did not move. Miss Keller, he said, I did not realize you were home. I am home, she said. So are you going to tell me what you need, or should I take your silence as a declaration of hostile intent and respond accordingly? Cole took 1 step forward and stopped when she made a fractional adjustment in the rifle's angle. I just want to look at something, he said. A deed. I have information that Lockhart holds a parcel of land northeast of this property that he does not have a legitimate claim to. I'd like to verify that information. The 40-acre deed she had found in the record's trunk. Her face gave nothing away. You would need to present any claims about land ownership to the county land office in Chilea, she said. If you have a legal argument regarding the title, that is the appropriate venue. I'd rather look at the deed. And I'd rather you leave this house, she said. These are the two options on the table. You choose which one we pursue. Cole studied her. He was a man who had spent his life reading the people across from him for the exact point at which they would fold, and she could feel him reading her now, and she held the rifle steady and looked at him with absolute steadiness and let him read what was there, which was the genuine truth. She was not going to fold. You know what's on that parcel, he said. The deed in question describes 40 acres of grassland. If there is something specific you believe to be on it, I suggest you consult a surveyor. She tilted her head toward the stairs. Mr. Cole. He turned and went back down the stairs. She heard the front door. She went to the window and watched him and his two men ride out of the yard, and she stood there until they were gone and then sat down in Raymond's desk chair and let herself shake for about 30 seconds. Then she put the rifle on the desk, got out a clean sheet of paper, and began writing down every detail of the encounter while it was fresh. Raymond came back that evening to find Eli's account of the visit, Della's written documentation, and the rifle on the desk. He read the documentation twice and then he sat down and looked at her. You held the house, he said. He wanted the deed. I know what he wanted. Raymond's voice had that quiet, concentrated quality. Della. You held the house with a rifle. You showed me how to use it. I did not show you how to use it expecting. He stopped. He pressed 2 fingers to his forehead and was quiet for a moment. The 40-acre parcel, he said. I should tell you what's on it. You don't have to. I want to. He leaned forward with his forearms on the desk. When Evangeline died, I bought that land because she had said in the year before, she had said that she loved the view from that corner of the range, that she could see 3 counties on a clear day. I bought it, and I never did anything with it, and I never could quite decide what I was saving it for. It's been empty for 5 years. Della was quiet. But last spring I had it surveyed, Raymond continued, and the surveyor found a small vein of copper running through the northeast corner of it. Nothing enormous, but enough to be worth something to the right buyer. He looked at her. Cole must have learned about the copper from the surveyor or from someone the surveyor told. He's been trying to establish a fraudulent claim to the property for months. That's what this is really about. The whole shape of Cole's campaign, the informants in the bunkhouse, the fence gutting, the visit to Della rearranged itself in her understanding into something more coherent and more threatening. He wants the mineral rights, she said. He wants the land. He's been trying to find documentation that the original purchase was irregular so he can challenge the title. Raymond's jaw set. There is nothing irregular about it. I have a clean title and a clear deed, but a man willing to pay a lawyer to look for irregularities can create delays and costs that are inconvenient even when they are groundless. The documentation is in order, she said. I have verified it myself. Your title is clean. He looked at her. You verified it 3 weeks ago. When I found the deed in the trunk, she met his eyes steadily. I verified all of your property documentation. It is all in order. The file is, she went to the cabinet she had reorganized and extracted a folder and put it on the desk in front of him. Here, if Cole pursues a legal challenge, your attorney will have everything he needs. Raymond looked at the folder. He looked at her, and then he said something that she had not expected. Why are you doing this? He said. And I don't mean I'm not asking about the legal documentation. I know why you're doing that. I mean all of it. Why are you? He stopped and started again. You came here for a practical arrangement. You came because you needed a position. You did not come here to hold off cattle thieves with a Winchester and spend your evenings learning Texas land law. And he stopped a 3rd time. His voice had an unsteadiness to it she had never heard from him. You could leave. The arrangement we made does not require any of what you've given this ranch. It does not require any of what you've given me. She was very still. I don't know what to do with it, he said quietly. I don't know what to do with someone who does more than the arrangement requires. I don't. He pressed his hand flat on the desk. I have spent 7 years making sure that nothing could require more of me than I could afford to give. And you have simply not respected that structure at all." She almost smiled. "No," she said, "I haven't. I'm not criticizing you for it. I know. I'm saying," he looked at her with an openness that she thought probably cost him enormously and that he offered anyway. "I'm saying that I notice it. I notice you. And I have been trying not to, because I am very aware of what happened the last time I let myself fully invest in someone's presence in my life, and I am afraid is the right word. I am afraid." The room was very quiet. The wind outside was the only sound. "Raymond," she said carefully, "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. That is true. But I stay here, because this place has become real to me. And you have become," she stopped, because she was not a woman who said things carelessly, and she wanted to say this exactly right. "You have become someone that I think about when you are not in the room. And I am aware that that is a change from when I arrived, when I was thinking only about balance sheets and supply contracts." His expression did something complicated and then settled into something simpler, which was hope. She recognized it because it was the same thing she had seen in herself in the mirror on the morning she had decided to answer the attorney's letter, the fragile, careful opening of a window that had been shut for a long time. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he said. "I used to. I was before. I was someone who was good at this, at being with someone. I've forgotten most of it." "You haven't," she said. "You make coffee for one, and I make it for two, and you don't say anything about it, but you drink it every morning. You showed me how to use the Winchester in one afternoon, and you were patient about it in a way that had nothing to do with household security. You went to Abilene because I told you to go, and you came back, and the first thing you did was come to the porch instead of the barn." She looked at him directly. "You have not forgotten how to do this. You have been doing it all along. You were just doing it without acknowledging it." Raymond stood up from the desk and came around it, and he crossed the room to where she was standing, and he stopped about a foot away from her. 1 foot, not 18 inches. "I would very much like to court you properly," he said. "If you're willing." She thought about solid ground, she thought about the warmth in it. "I am willing," she said. He reached out and took her hand, her right hand, and held it in both of his. And they stood in the lamplit study of the Crooked L Ranch house in October of 1878, and it was the most ordinary, extraordinary moment she had ever been inside. Garvey Cole's legal challenge materialized in November, filed with the county court in Chilea by an Amarillo attorney named Prescott, who had a reputation for creative interpretation of property law. The claim alleged that Raymond's 1874 purchase of the 40-acre parcel had been completed using funds from a joint account that he and his then-partner James Lockhart had shared, and that James Lockhart had therefore a claim to half the value of the property, and that his departure from the partnership without formal dissolution of said partnership rendered the entire transaction irregular. It was, as Della's careful reading of the county land statutes made clear within 2 hours of receiving the documentation, almost entirely without legal merit. The joint account in question had been dissolved in 1873, 1 year before the purchase. She had the bank records to prove it. Raymond's attorney, a sharp man in Chilea named Dewhurst, who had been waiting for exactly this kind of maneuver, had the response filed within a week. But more significantly, Raymond wrote to James in Abilene and explained the situation, and James, ill as he was, dictated and signed an affidavit stating clearly that he had no claim to the property in question and had never believed himself to have one, and that he would testify to this effect by written deposition if required. The affidavit arrived at Dewhurst's office in December, and Cole's attorney quietly withdrew the challenge shortly after the new year. Cole himself left Hale County in February of 1879, reportedly headed for New Mexico. Tom Holt reported his departure to Raymond with the kind of satisfaction that comes from a long job finally finished, and Raymond received the news over coffee in the kitchen, Della's kitchen, as everyone on the ranch had begun thinking of it by then, and said only, "Good," and then asked if there were biscuits. There were biscuits. There were always biscuits on Tuesday. What had happened in the months between October and February, in the spaces between the legal maneuvering and the ranch work and the quiet evenings by the fire in the sitting room that had ceased to be unused, was a courtship of the most careful and deliberate kind. Raymond Lockhart courted Della Keller the way he did everything that mattered to him, which was with full attention and without shortcuts. He rode with her over the land on Saturday mornings and showed her things. The way the grass changed color in the afternoon light, the place on the northern range where the creek bent and the cottonwoods made shade, the hill to the northeast from which, on a clear day, you could see exactly what Evangeline had said you could see. He told her about the land as though it was the only love language he had ever been entirely fluent in, and she listened and understood that was exactly what it was. She cooked with Mrs. Aldridge and learned the rhythms of the kitchen, not because cooking was expected of her, but because she found that she loved feeding people, that there was something deep in her that was satisfied by the table being full, and the house being warm and everyone in it being cared for. She played the piano one evening, just once, because she had not played since her mother died and was uncertain how it would feel, and Raymond appeared in the doorway of the sitting room and stood there for the rest of the piece without saying anything, and when she finished he said, "I didn't know you played." "I used to," she said. "I may again." "I hope you will," he said. She played more after that. The dust came off the keys. He kissed her for the first time on a cold January evening on the back porch, where she had gone to look at the stars because the sky had gone extraordinary with them. A clear night after 2 cloudy weeks, and the Milky Way was so dense and bright it seemed almost too much to be real. He came out with his jacket and draped it over her shoulders without comment, and they stood looking at the sky together, and then he turned to her and said her name, just that, just her name, and kissed her with the same deliberate, full-attention quality he brought to everything important, and she thought, yes, this is the thing I did not let myself think about, and this is why I did not let myself. Because when it arrived it was too big to have held at a careful distance. She kissed him back and felt him smile against her mouth, and it was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it was everything. Spring came to the Texas Panhandle in a long tide of green, slow and certain after the hard winter, and with it came a morning in March when Raymond came down to the kitchen at 6 and found Della making coffee, and he stood in the doorway, his doorway pause, the pause he still did, the pause she had decided she would never try to change because it was him, and then he came in and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "I would like to marry you." She turned from the stove. He was sitting at the table with his hands wrapped around an empty cup, waiting for the coffee with the patience of a man who had been waiting a long time for many things, and had finally stopped minding the waiting. "Yes," she said. He looked up. "Yes, Raymond." She brought the coffee and sat across from him. "I have been in love with you since approximately the time you showed me how to use the Winchester and did not once make me feel foolish for not already knowing." He looked at her for a long moment. "That was the 2nd week." "Yes. You have been in love with me since the 2nd week and you have said nothing." "I was waiting for you to catch up," she said. He put his coffee down and came around the table and pulled her up out of her chair and held her, properly held her, with both arms and his face against her hair, and she could feel him breathing, and she put her arms around him and thought that this was what solid ground felt like when it was warm, when it was alive, when it was not just beneath your feet but all around you. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I have been trying to find a way to tell you that was equal to what it actually is." "This is equal," she said. They were married in May of 1879 in the Baptist church in Chilea, which was small and slightly drafty, and entirely full of ranch hands and townspeople and Mrs. Aldridge, who cried through the whole ceremony with the efficient dedication of a woman who feels things thoroughly and makes no apology for it. Tom Holt stood beside Raymond as the best man and shook Raymond's hand before the ceremony with an expression that was the closest thing to joy she had ever seen on his careful face, and told him he was the luckiest man in Hale County and probably several adjacent counties as well. Raymond told him he was right and did not argue the point. Della wore the blue dress she had brought from Memphis, the one she had thought she might wear for something uncertain, and had found instead was perfect for something absolutely sure. And she carried prairie flowers that one of the younger hands had ridden out at dawn to collect from the North Range, and presented to her with a red face and a stammered compliment that had made her laugh genuinely for the first time since her arrival. There was a celebration afterward at the ranch, with the cookhouse throwing open its doors and Tom Holt producing a fiddle from somewhere and two of the hands who could manage a passable guitar. And the yard was lit with lanterns against the spring dusk, and people danced in the packed dirt, and Raymond Lockhart, who she had been warned would never warm to anyone, danced with his new wife under the Texas sky and was warm, was completely warm, was the warmest thing she had ever been near. She told him that later, in the quiet of the house after everyone had gone, and he said that she was the cause of it, and she said she did not think that was entirely accurate. She thought the warmth had been there all along, waiting for someone to trust with it, and he said that the distinction seemed unimportant to him at this particular moment and kissed her again, and she decided the distinction could wait. The first year of their marriage was the kind of year that a person looks back on from later distances and understands was a gift, though it did not always feel like one while it was happening because gifts rarely do. It was the year of learning each other in all the ways that courting, no matter how careful, does not quite prepare you for. It was the year of discovering that Raymond could be stubborn about certain things, specifically anything involving the management of the North Range, about which he had deeply held opinions that were occasionally wrong, and that Della, who was gentle in her manner, was entirely uninterested in backing down when she was right about something, and that these two qualities created a number of spirited arguments that always ended in the same place, which was both of them sitting in the kitchen with coffee and eventually laughing at themselves. It was the year they learned to disagree and not unseal the world. In the fall of that year, Tom Holt came to Raymond with a quiet word about a family in the county, a widow named Harmon with 3 young sons whose ranch had failed and who was in danger of losing her house. Raymond went to Della that evening and they talked it through, and the next week Mrs. Harmon was working as a second cook in the cookhouse, and her oldest son, at 16, was learning cattle work from Tom Holt, and her 2 younger boys were being tutored in letters and arithmetic by Della 2 mornings a week in the sitting room that had once been a room no one used. The piano sounded most evenings now. In the winter of 1880, they received word from Abilene that James Lockhart had died. He had gone peacefully, according to the letter from the doctor who had attended him, and he had died knowing that he and his brother had said what needed to be said. And that was, as Raymond told Della on the night the letter arrived, sitting beside her in front of the fire with her hand in both of his, as much as any person could ask for. He grieved quietly and thoroughly, the way he did everything, and she sat with him through it and did not try to make it smaller or faster, and he told her afterward that she was the most present person he had ever known, that she had the gift of being completely in a moment, and she said she had learned it from him, which was partly true. In the spring of 1881, Della told Raymond he was going to be a father. He was in the barn when she found him, checking the hooves of a young horse that had come up lame, and she stood in the barn doorway. His doorway pause. She did it too now. She had caught it from him without noticing and waited until he looked up, and then she told him. He was very still for about 5 seconds. Then he set the horse's hoof down very carefully and stood up and came to where she was in a few long strides and held her face in both hands and looked at her with an expression that she had never seen from him before and hoped she would see again for the rest of her life, which was completely unguarded, completely open, entirely given over. "Della," he said. "Yes," she said. "I know." They named the boy Joseph, which was Della's father's name, her father at his best, at the man he had been before the debts and the losses, the man she had loved, and Raymond held him on the first evening of his life with the same full attention he gave to everything that mattered, with the same deliberate care, and looked at the small face and said, very quietly, that he intended to do better by this small person than anyone had done by him. And Della said she thought he would, and she meant it without reservation. Joseph Lockhart grew into a sturdy, brown-eyed boy who followed Tom Holt around the ranch from the moment he could walk reliably, and who had his father's directness and his mother's gift for being completely present in whatever moment he found himself in. He called Tom Holt Mr. Tom for the first 3 years of his life, and then switched to just Tom one morning without explanation, and Tom Holt was quietly beside himself with pleasure about it. By the time Joseph was 2, Della was expecting again, and Raymond was. She watched him carefully, not afraid the way she had thought he might be, not braced against the possibility of loss the way a man who had lost what he had lost might reasonably be. He was nervous, yes. She could see that. But underneath the nervousness was something steadier, something that had been rebuilt from the ground up over the past few years, and that held. The second child was a girl, born in the summer of 1883, and they named her Clara after Della's mother. Clara Lockhart arrived in the world with her father's dark hair and her mother's particular quality of seeing everything at once, and she was the loudest, most decisive infant that Mrs. Aldridge, who had attended a considerable number of births in her life, had ever encountered. Raymond held her and looked at Della and said, "She is going to be formidable." "Yes," Della agreed. "She is going to be exactly like you." He laughed. A real laugh, full and unguarded. The laugh she had first heard in January under the stars, and had spent several years since collecting like something precious. Tom Holt retired from active foreman duties in 1885, at the age of 54, with a small cottage on the eastern corner of the ranch land that Raymond deeded to him with papers drawn up by Dewhurst, free and clear. Because Tom Holt had been the person who had driven to Amarillo and stood on a train platform and told a woman the honest truth about what she was walking into. And that act of loyalty had changed the entire shape of Raymond Lockhart's life. Raymond told him so directly, on the evening they signed the papers, and Tom Holt pressed his lips together in that way he had and said that he had just been doing his job. Raymond said, "No, you were not. You were doing something considerably beyond your job." Tom Holt turned his hat in his hands. "I suppose I was," he said. "She seemed like the right one." "She is the right one," Raymond said. Tom Holt's replacement as foreman was the oldest of the Harmon boys, Marcus, who had grown up working the Crooked L and knew its land and its cattle as well as anyone alive, and had Tom Holt's steady judgment and his own considerable initiative. Della told Raymond the promotion was the right call before he made it, and Raymond said he agreed, and they had reached this conclusion independently on the same Tuesday morning over coffee, which Raymond observed was what happened when two people paid attention to the same things. The Crooked L had grown by then. They had purchased adjacent range land in 1882, 3,000 acres to the south that had come available when the neighboring operation failed in the drought year, and the cattle operation had expanded accordingly. Della managed the full accounting operation now with a young woman from Chilea named Margaret Baines, who had been educated at a school in Dallas and could not find employment in her own right because the available positions in Chilea did not stretch to the uses of her education, and who was worth twice what Della paid her. The injustice of that was something Della did not shrug at. She told Margaret Baines exactly what the accounting work required and paid her accordingly, and wrote her a reference that was specific and strong when Margaret eventually went to establish her own bookkeeping practice in Amarillo in 1886, and was pleased when word came back that the practice had succeeded. The 40-acre parcel with the copper vein had been quietly developed through a partnership with a mining concern out of Colorado, beginning in 1881. The operation was small and carefully managed, and had, by the mid-1880s, produced a return that Raymond had invested back into the ranch's water infrastructure, new wells along the South Range, a proper cistern system that made the dry years less catastrophic. The land that Evangeline had loved for its view was also, it turned out, the land that had made the Crooked L water secure in a county where water security was life itself. Della thought about that sometimes. About the way Evangeline had pointed at that view and said something she loved, and about how that love had led through grief and purchase and years of an empty deed in a forgotten trunkta, the thing that kept the ranch alive through the hard, dry summers of the 1880s. She did not say this to Raymond, not directly, but she thought he understood it too, because occasionally he would ride northeast with her on a clear day, and they would sit on the hill that Evangeline had loved and look at the three counties spread out below them. And he would be quiet in a way that was not the closed quiet but the open kind, the kind that held many things and was at peace with holding them. Joseph turned 7 in 1888 and announced with complete authority that he intended to be a rancher. Raymond told him he would have to learn mathematics and law and surveying as well as cattle and land, and Joseph said that was fine, and Della began supplementing his education accordingly. Clara, at 5, announced that she intended to be whatever Joseph was but better, and Joseph said that was impossible, and Clara looked at him with her father's expression and said nothing, which was far more effective. There was a third child, born in 1889. Another boy, who arrived 2 weeks early and immediately began making up for lost time, and who they named Thomas after Tom Holt, who came to sit on the porch the morning after the birth with tears he did not pretend he was not shedding, and said he was very grateful, and that it was too great an honor, and that he did not deserve it. Raymond told him that honor was given where it was owed, and that the debt they had tried to repay with the cottage and the name was still running a considerable surplus in Raymond's accounting. Tom Holt said, "I just drove her from the train station." "You told her the truth," Raymond said, "when it would have been easier not to. You told her what she was walking into, and you gave her the real information so she could make a real choice. That is not a small thing, Tom." Tom Holt looked out over the South Range where the morning was coming up golden and long across the grass. "No," he said eventually, "I suppose it isn't." The small Thomas Lockhart, called Tommy by absolutely everyone except his father, who called him Thomas on formal occasions, and then forgot about the formality by the 3rd year, grew into a sunny, talkative child who was the opposite of his father in temperament and the image of him in feature, which made Raymond's relationship with him a study in comfortable bewilderment. Raymond had never been a sunny, talkative person and could not quite account for one appearing in his household, and Della explained that Tommy had taken her own qualities in those directions and added several degrees of additional brightness that were entirely his own. Raymond said, "He talks to the horses." "He does," Della agreed. "The horses appear to enjoy it." "They do. I have no framework for understanding this." "You do not need one," she said. "Just let him talk. He will tell you everything important about himself if you simply let him talk." Raymond tried this approach and discovered that Della was correct, as she generally was about these things, and that his youngest son had a deep and particular intelligence that expressed itself through words rather than the careful observation and silence that Raymond had always relied upon, and that this was not a worse intelligence, just a different one, and that it made the house considerably louder and considerably more alive. By 1891, the Crooked L had 15 hands, a foreman, 2 barn workers, a cook in the cookhouse, Mrs. Aldridge still ruling the main house with calm authority at 68, and a household that moved around a kitchen table every morning with an energy that Raymond Lockhart, in the year 1878, would not have been able to imagine for himself. He sat at that table on a morning in the fall of 1891 October, the month she had arrived 13 years before, the month the ranch always smelled of dry grass and wood smoke and the approaching cold, and he watched Della pour coffee with the ease of a woman in her own kitchen, which it had been for over a decade. And he watched Joseph argue with Clara about some matter of ranch management that they had taken to arbitrating at breakfast, because both of them regarded breakfast as an appropriate venue for all important discussions. And he watched Tommy tell the story of something that had happened in the barn to an increasingly delighted Mrs. Aldridge, and he held his coffee cup and looked at his life and understood, with the full clarity of a man who had once understood the opposite with equal clarity, that he was entirely and completely fortunate. Della sat down beside him with her own coffee and looked at him looking at the table and said, "What are you thinking about?" "You," he said. She looked at him with the expression she still had after 13 years, the one that was direct and warm and completely present. "What about me?" "About the morning you arrived," he said. "About the fact that you walked through that door and you were not what I expected. What did you expect?" "I don't know." "Something that would fit into the practical arrangement and not exceed it." He looked at the table full of people and noise and life. "I expected something manageable. And I was not manageable. You were the most unmanageable thing that has ever happened to me," he said, with a warmth that turned the word into something entirely other than a complaint. She laughed, her real laugh, the one that he had worked for in the early months and that now came easily and often, and leaned over and kissed his cheek. And Joseph made a sound of theatrical disgust, and Clara told him to stop being ridiculous, and Tommy asked what was funny, and Mrs. Aldridge said there would be biscuits in 10 minutes if everyone settled down, which was the most effective peacekeeping measure in the Lockhart household, and had been for years. Raymond Lockhart put his arm around his wife in his kitchen on an October morning in Texas, with the light coming long and gold through the window and the ranch alive outside and the future entirely open, and he was warm from the inside out, warm in a way that 13 years of loving a woman who walked through his door and refused to be managed had built in him like a fire that did not go out. Tom Holt had been right. The boss had never warmed to anyone, and then she had arrived. And everything that had been sealed became open, and everything that had been empty became full, and the crooked L built for a life that had not come, for rooms that had waited unfilled, for a piano that had sat silent in a parlor no one used became exactly what it had always been meant to be. A home. Completely, abundantly, irrevocably a home.